Hi everybody, welcome to the webinar. We'll just wait a couple of minutes to let as many people join as possible, and then we'll get cracking in about 2 minutes or so. Okay, it already looks like we've got a fair few people joining, so I'll just get started. So I'm Lily from Triptease, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. I'm here with Scott from Triptease and Estella from SHR, who'll be introducing themselves in a moment. I just want to take a couple of minutes just to walk through what we'll be talking about today, how the webinar software works, and how you can get in touch with any questions. So our topic today is the new Metasearch, smart bidding with Google for guest acquisition and conversion. And we've got a real range of companies on the call today. So we'll start by taking a bit of a zoomed out look, talking about why Metasearch matters, kind of zooming in on some of Google's recent changes. Then we'll talk a little bit about what Triptease have been doing recently in terms of our technology, how we are looking at the kind of which levers to pull, how to really optimize your performance in a Metasearch function, and then taking a look at the full funnel view from acquisition through to conversion and how you can really start to use both of those strategies to power each other. So the software we're using is GoToWebinar, so you should all have a control panel. So there's a questions bar on there, so you can submit questions at any time, whether it's to do with anything technical, you can't hear us, you can't see us properly, and just let us know. Or if you have questions about any of the content, do put them in there and we'll come to as many as we can at the end. If there are questions that we don't have time for, we'll be following up afterwards. So I'll get started. This is Scott and Estella. So Scott, I was wondering if you could just start by introducing yourself and Triptease.
Hi everyone, I'm Scott here from Triptease. So I am a product manager on our guest acquisition product. So many of you, I assume, will know Triptease already. We've been around for 5 or so years helping hotels convert guests on their hotel websites. In the last kind of 6 to 9 months, we've moved beyond the hotel website, realizing that we have tons and tons of really exciting data that we've been collecting from hundreds of millions of user journeys, and realize that we can harness that and push that into Metasearch auctions to drive your guest acquisition strategy.
Perfect. And Estella, if you could tell us a bit about yourself and SHR.
Absolutely. Welcome, everyone. I am Estella Hale, and I am the Chief Product Evangelist at SHR. In this role, I help determine strategy for product development here at SHR. And what we do at SHR is we do distribution technology. We've been pioneering advanced distribution technology for over a decade. And we do so by helping to just simplify the complex world of hoteliers with our technology. And then we provide the intelligent support that is needed to support it.
Fantastic, thank you. Someone's on the line just saying that we have a slight issue with an echo, so I'm just going to revert to the microphone. I hope that fixes the problem. Do let me know if you're still hearing an echo. But in the meantime, let's move on and begin with some of the content. So Estella, I was hoping you could take us through why are we talking about Metasearch now? Kind of why is it kind of feels like there's been a resurgence in its importance and how much hoteliers are talking about it. So maybe you could just take us through the bigger picture of why we're talking about it now.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, this is not new, but it is definitely very relevant now, particularly with the changes that we're seeing in Google. And Google really, they're in a great position to be a Metasearch provider for hotels because, well, they're the Metasearch providers for everything else. And they focus a lot on the user experience. So what I see is that this matters from a distribution perspective. Well, number one, because your guests are there. And since your guests are there, and one of the main purposes of appearing on these online travel and digital presence is to reach your guests where they are. So it is very important and very relevant.
Fantastic, thanks. So Scott, maybe you could take us through what we're looking at on this slide and some of the functionalities around Metasearch.
Yeah, sure. So here I've just got 3 different examples of some of the different Metasearch sites. So there are about 40 or 50 different Metasearch sites globally that we recognize, but really there's a long tail of quite small providers, but really it's much more concentrated up at the top end. So we think that Google have around about 50% market share in terms of the bookings delivered through Meta, with TripAdvisor and Trivago following in kind of second and third place. And then there are other big players such as Skyscanner, Bing, WeGo, Hotels Combined, and Kayak. Focusing in on Google, as we said, this is the biggest player, and they're also the fastest growing. I just thought it would be worth contextualizing actually what Metasearch is for those that aren't so familiar with the subject. So as you can see on this Google panel here, I've got 3 different colored rectangles. So just to make it really clear as to which bit means which. In the green rectangle at the bottom, this is the organic search listing. So this is typically what your SEO optimization is for. It's how can we get the highest listing within the search engine results page here. In the blue box, these are the Google ads. So these are the paid AdWords kind of promotions that hotels can offer, but these aren't limited to just hotels. Any kind of business are able to participate in these. On the right, however, this is the bit that we're talking about today. This is the Metasearch panel, and as you can see here, this panel will appear when you make a branded search for the hotel. So, and that's important to point out. If I typed in here luxury hotels New York, this panel wouldn't appear. So once you actually type the name of the hotel, this panel pops up. I guess one of the first things to point out that you'll notice is that there's some imagery at the top. There's a map. You can see information such as how many stars the hotel has, its address and phone. But most importantly is the price. And really what differentiates Metasearch from an OTA is that Metasearch is like an index or library of different prices. Meta channels don't actually sell the hotel room. They're merely linking through to other providers that actually are selling that inventory. And so as you can see here, there's that direct price listed right at the top with OTAs underneath it.
Fantastic, thanks, Scott. Again, if you do have any questions, just do keep throwing them in. If they're kind of pertinent to what Scott's talking about right now, then we'll put them straight to him, or otherwise we'll save them to the end. So moving on to our next topic or our next slide. Estella, maybe you could talk us through what can we see Google doing in the travel space and why are they important to this discussion?
Yes, definitely. They've recently released this very clean, very uncluttered, map-based user interface, and data indicates that both from the travel perspective and the hotel perspective, searches are starting on Google. And with these recent changes on the user interface, it indicates that Google is aiming to keep that traveler, that journey, that search on their platform for longer. So think of the path that has been typically followed with Metasearch, and Scott did a great job describing right now how that end path of booking happens when they click away from it. Well, that is extending. Google's intention is extend the traveler journey for longer. But specifically, I'm going to call on Scott to tell us more about the interface.
Sure. So this interface is actually really new. I mean, it's incredible how often Google are experimenting with new things. I mean, we need to remember that Google's mission statement is to make the world's information accessible online. And so they are constantly iterating and trying new things to optimize the travel journey. And so they're making strides in not only hotels, but in flights, in restaurants, and in listings like this. And they're synthesizing a lot of these different data sources, and they're bringing them together in a really easy to use UI, such as you can see here. I'm sure lots of you will, if you haven't seen this already, will think that this is actually very similar to Airbnb. I mean, we think it looks pretty similar, and obviously Airbnb and Google are both best in class at conversion rate optimization. And so it's no surprise that Google will continue to do things like this to work out how they can best monetize their travel partners.
Absolutely, and I think what some people have picked up on from this new interface is that there's obviously a great deal of pricing information and the Metasearch auction, but it does seem that there's quite a lot of organic information being brought in as well, whether it's reviews or photos. So I wonder if we could explore a little bit the question of Metasearch engines have always historically been supplier agnostic, whereas is there any indication that Google are kind of leaning towards the direct provider?
Sure. So Google acting as a like an auction place or as a marketplace for different vendors to place their inventory. They have to be channel agnostic, and people simply wouldn't want to participate in those auctions if the cards were the decks were stacked, and that's that kind of what we think to be as a bit of like a rumor is probably even more so the case when you look at some of the Metasearch channels such as like Kayak and Trivago, which actually are both partly or wholly owned by Booking and Expedia Holdings. But again, these guys are obviously like vetted and audited, and to make sure that everything is it is fair. The one thing that like Google do say that they will discriminate on in terms of from one supplier to another is on price accuracy. Google are, as Estella mentioned earlier, all about that user experience. And one of the most damaging things you can do to your Metasearch campaign and to your reputation in the eyes of the consumer is to show a price or send a price to Google that actually when the user clicks through to that link is then incorrect or more expensive than they were anticipating. If this happens, Google will really like penalize you, and they will make it more expensive for you to bid, which will impact your ROI. So that's the only thing I can really think of in terms of how Google treat different partners. Google, really important. Yeah. About 7 or 8 out of all hotel searches, starting here. When it actually comes to the meta piece, one of the first things and one of the lowest hanging fruit kind of things that a hotel can do is to sort out their Google My Business listing. So in conversations with the head of Google Travel here in EMEA, he was saying that still a really surprisingly high amount of hotels don't actually have the correct information listed within Google My Business. So if there's one thing that you guys do after the call today, it's if you haven't looked at that in a while, go through, make sure that your address and your phone number are up to date, that the website links through to the right place, that you've selected the right photo if you're able to do that, and all of these kind of really basic things that just will take you 20 minutes to update, but will really change how your hotel is presented on the most important website in the world. Kind of moving on to Metasearch. So, I referred to you earlier to some of the features of this Metasearch panel, which you can see here on the right-hand side. There's a few different ways in which that you can really succeed in the auction. The first of those is simply to be there. So, we know that the users are there. To really put some data behind that, OTAs are getting 24% of their inbound traffic from Metasearch. That's massive. Like 1 in 4 of their inbound users are coming from Meta. From the average hotel, it's only 2%. So there's this enormous difference, right, between how well hotels are really monetizing and harnessing the power of Meta versus what the OTAs are doing. And so we think that it's just, again, if there's something else that there's another key takeaway from this webinar, it's that you really need to be there. Quite simply, a client once put it to me, they're like, Scott, I think of it like a shopping list, and if you're not there, you're not going to get bought, and that's exactly right. So that's step one, is making sure that you actually have a presence within Meta, and then after that, we can kind of look into this panel, and we can look at the different aspects of what's going to really drive success. So number one is parity. Inherently, if someone is looking on the Metasearch panel, be it on Google or Trivago, TripAdvisor, or any of the others, they're price conscious because they're not just going blindly to your site or to their OTA of choice. They want to shop around. They want to see where they can get the best price. So it's really important that you're putting your best foot forward, and that you're showing your potential customers, or maybe even your existing loyalty customers, that you are the best place in terms of price for them to purchase a room. So at Triptease, we have a market-leading solution in our on-site parity tool, and we're really kind of delighted that we're able to roll that out into Metasearch as well. So we were actually able to stop you from being shown when you're being undercut on Google. And so what that means is that we can both protect your brand from, especially if you're like a luxury brand, the last thing that you want to do is really reinforce this idea in the consumer's mind that there's a better place for them to purchase your product. But also it really makes a real big economic impact, because actually even if you are being undercut on Meta and you show anyway, a user will often click your website, have a look around just to get a better feel for the brand, because we know that the vast majority of users who book on an OTA don't just book on that OTA without checking the website. They want to go and really get a better look at more images, really get to see the descriptions of the rooms as written by the hotel themselves. So that's costing you money. So that's what we think is probably another key takeaway, is that you've got to be managing your parity on Meta. The other things that we're doing is making sure that we're and the other things that anyone should be doing is making sure that you're showing to the right people. So we've created what we call a guest value index, and what that means is we're looking at both demographic information as well as behavioral information to establish who we want to show to and how much we're willing to pay to show to that individual. So within Google, there are 5 or 6 different levers that you're able to pull in order to manipulate how much you want to pay to feature in that auction. So these things include, which user is the country coming from, which country is the user coming from, what device are they browsing from, what's their length of stay, when are they looking to check in, and things like that. And so these are really kind of complex to all do in tandem, and that's why we've approached this with a sort of AI machine learning type approach, because it's really profoundly hard to do this like at scale, and especially if you have multiple properties or you have guests coming from lots of different markets. So in order to really drive ROI, you want to make sure that you are making sure that you're only really showing to those high value guests who are most likely to convert, and not to those people that are early on in their purchasing journey or from markets that are really unlikely to ever stay at your hotel.
Thanks, Scott.
Cool.
I think, although we've had a bit of a disjointed experience so far today, so I think we might have missed it, but I was wondering if we could just return to, I think some people on the call might be wondering, what are the difference? So we've talked about kind of how best to perform on Metasearch, but for people just entering into it, what are the different payment and pricing options that people have, and how does that differentiate from an OTA? Sure.
So broadly speaking, there are two ways, or 2 different camps that you can participate in Metasearch. One is kind of what Google calls CPC, which is where you have a fixed media budget every month. So you might say, for my hotel, I have $5,000, and you spend that with Google as best you can. And your objective there is to get the highest amount of bookings or highest amount of booking value that you can from that fixed budget. The other way is kind of what Google call performance models, which is where you either pay on a per conversion basis or on a per stay basis. So this is often a method or a payment kind of structure that hotels that are new to Metasearch because it means that there's no upfront risk. You only pay when Google actually delivers a booking. And so if you're thinking about how can I kind of test out the waters and see if Metasearch is something that works for the hotel, that would be quite a common entry point.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks so much. Now, Estella, if we return to you, I just wanted to again zoom back outwards and think about what are the implications of all of this for hotels, kind of Google moving into their own travel sites, this emphasis on Metasearch being the place to kind of be appearing. Wondering if you could take a bit more of a zoomed out approach to how hotels should be feeling.
Absolutely. So Lily, going back to just distribution strategy and what we were mentioning earlier about just the motivator behind the digital presence and the digital effort of a hotel and a channel, what we're seeing on our side, we connect hotels to pretty much every channel that is available as a central reservation system. And we're seeing a tiredness of connecting to hundreds of channels, which was a focus several years ago, and that hotels are now really focusing on their best producing ones. And after all, they should, because the channels are a means to an end, and connecting to the guest is the primary purpose. So I think by focusing on that strategy and on that purpose, Metasearch and Metasearch with Google, it's an important channel to have in a distribution mix. Of course, guided by strategy. Like Scott was mentioning, if you know the specific markets you want to reach, if you know the specific segments you want to reach, you can tailor that bidding so that you appear for those guests. Or you can start, if it is something that what you're taking out of this webinar is that you want to start, well, look at the flat fee model that your central distribution provider offers, but then do more. So short story, appear, compete, and decide when it's relevant and for which market.
Absolutely, and we've had a question in actually from James that's relevant to, I think, what both of you were saying. So in terms of thinking about it as part of your distribution mix, we have a question. Based on your Google Hotel Ads experience, I think this is one for Scott, do you recommend unlimited budget for your ad spend? Because return on investment, ROI, is almost always better than OTA commission.
Sure, so I think that's a really good question. In terms of finding the right level of spend, it's a little bit of trial and error. However, I think what you should do, James, is think about how much are you paying your OTA partners, and then if you say, okay, on average I'm paying, let's say 15% or 20%, and then say, do I value a direct booking as much as that? We would argue, yes, you should value direct booking as much as an OTA booking, if not more, because you get more data from them, and then there's a much higher chance that you'll actually win that guest back who will come through an organic channel, so you won't have to pay to reacquire them. So we know that the more you spend on Metasearch, the actually up to a certain point, you'll drive more volume, but then you get into this kind of like diminishing returns where actually you'll start to spend more, but you won't generate a lot more volume, but your return on investment will decrease. So really what you're trying to do in terms of optimizing your spend, if you're able to have an unlimited budget, then great, but as long as your distribution cost or your cost of sale remains kind of in line with where your OTA partners are at.
Fantastic. Estella, did you have anything to add on to that one, or should we move on to the next slide?
No, I think that was a great approach. Thank you.
Fantastic. So what we wanted to cover in this webinar today, as well as acquisition and Metasearch and what we're starting to look at Triptease, was also how can this be related to the conversion experience and the conversion strategy. So Estella, I was wondering if you could talk us through, we've focused so far on bidding, price parity, acquisition. How should hotels be thinking about converting guests once they arrive within the booking engine?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we have looked at the pragmatic side, and while we continue doing that, I do want to take a pause and say that I believe this is a great opportunity for hotels to really appear where the guests are looking during their travel plans, and then to link them to their own website, where they can tailor the content, where they can tailor the offers, where they can, again, optimize the eyes that come to the site and optimize that conversion. So of course, the booking engine experience is going to be very important. The assurance of the deal that they selected to land on is going to be important. Parity, as Scott was mentioning, not only for that guest experience, but also because it can penalize you with Google if you do not have the rate that you have advertised. But definitely, I think this is an exciting, great opportunity for hotels. It is something that, if put on their distribution mix and with a good guest experience, because again, as Google's improving in that guest experience, they expect some of that similar experience when they land on your site, all of that is part of the conversion experience.
Fantastic. And Scott, I suppose to you, historically, I think we've seen from our side the areas of acquisition and conversion being dealt with maybe quite separately in a hotelier's kind of strategy. So what are the potential benefits and opportunities we're seeing from starting to take a slightly more holistic view?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, like data, everyone's heard this a million times now, but data really is the greatest asset you have when it comes to digital marketing. And the OTAs know this, and every day that goes on, they are collecting billions and billions more data points that enable them to make more sophisticated decisions, so they can, kind of sad to say this, but ultimately steal traffic away from hotels more efficiently and more cheaply. So it's really about looking at the data that you have, and really harnessing that and pushing that into all the different arenas you can, and bringing it together and really breaking down those data silos. Like if you have Google Analytics, you're able to look at what's the typical profile of people that stay at your hotel. How's that changing from day to day, from month to month, and really using that to inform the kind of the bidding decisions that you want to make. Now, again, this is pretty hard work, and that's why actually the majority of hotels use an agency such as Triptease to make a lot of these decisions for them, because it requires an intense amount of work in order to do it correctly and to make sure you really are paying the right amount for each of those clicks. I think the really exciting thing is that actually there is so much opportunity here, and that when it's done correctly, this can really move the needle for hotels. So I mean, from Triptease hotels live on Meta over the last kind of month or so, we're seeing up to around 10% of conversion value has come from Metasearch. So it really is substantive in driving your direct volumes. And the really great thing is that we see is when you're actually able to tie up that Metasearch journey through to the on-site journey. So we can do some really cool things, such as if you have any direct booking benefits, we can surface those through Metasearch callouts, where there's a little subtitle. So you could say, book direct for a free breakfast, or the kind of things that the OTAs can't compete with you on. So you really need to find your natural advantages you have, and then really showcase those on places such as Meta. Then there's other things you can think about, which is how can you use software to really personalize that experience, acknowledging the journey that someone has had before they've arrived on site. And as Estella said, perhaps that means tailoring the content or recognizing the type of search they've made. If they have said they've added children into their mix on Meta, maybe you want to think about more like a family type room rate, or maybe if it's a single traveler, you're going to show them some business packages. So there's loads and loads of scope to really make sure that your website is really speaking to that individual, and that's ultimately going to boost your conversion rates and direct booking revenue.
Fantastic, thanks. I think probably we have some time now. I know we lost some time with the technical difficulties, to move to a bit more of an open Q&A. So I can see many of you have already started submitting, so do keep those coming. To begin with, we have a question from James, different James to earlier. Have there been any studies about what percentage of the time users choose the website link versus an official hotel site meta link when it is shown at parity? So I think this means if an OTA and a hotel are both at the same price on a Metasearch auction, do we know, is there a preference?
Yeah, so I think there's two data points I've got here. One of those is around what's the share, if assuming that you are present within Meta, what's the share of clicks that you get? Now, this isn't something that Google actually discloses, but actually I was literally reading just this morning that they will be, as they move, they're kind of improving their Google Hotel Ad system, they will actually start disclosing the click share volume, so actually what's your brand carry or affinity that you can get from Metasearch auctions. So that'll be really interesting to benchmark. But what we do know, and this is from I think a Focusrite or a Skift study that was done at the end of last year, is that 8 out of 10 of users that make a search on Google don't actually make it onto the direct website in that first click. So OTAs or other meta search engines that are bidding on your brand terms, or that just happen to be there, perhaps above the hotel, are sapping away traffic that was ultimately destined for your website. And so it means you're having to often that's coming to your site in a really indirect way. The other data point in there that I think is really interesting, which is in reference to parity. So again, speaking with the head of Google Hotel Ads here in London, he said that across all of the hotels that they look at, your click-through rate is 3 times higher when you're in parity or cheaper direct. So it really has a profound impact to be managing your parity in terms of how many more people you're going to drive to your website.
And I think that goes back to, again, the concept of, number one, appear. Scott mentioned earlier the percentages of traffic to the booking page of OTA versus your direct site. I think it was something like 2% versus 20%. So number one, appear. Number two, compete. So again, show up with a price. Use the technology that you have to distribute to all of those channels. And in the case of a CRS, you can derive rates to know that you're not going to have a rate that is lower on an OTA. But then also, I think you do have to take into consideration that you're going to bid when it's relevant. So yes, the percentage of how many people click to is important, but it's also important to look at from a distribution strategy perspective and what the results that you are getting on that conversion or on that investment, that digital marketing investment of Metasearch versus OTA or increasing traffic, etc. So I think the numbers show the relevance, but I think also looking into how you're going to approach from a strategy perspective and what you expect to have as a return from appearing and from competing and from when it's relevant is also important.
Great, thanks, Estella. We've had one in as well, which I think many people have probably, well, I've definitely seen this commented on myself, is do we think with the kind of the Google travel site, do we think that they're moving towards becoming an OTA? Can we envision facilitated bookings? I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah.
Well, in a way, I would say they already are somewhat of an OTA. They definitely have a different business model, but they intend to be the place where people will plan their travel. They intend to enable purchase of that travel on their site. So again, it might look a little bit different because their business model is different, but in a certain way, they are a place for people to plan travel and where they very much facilitate the purchase.
And would you agree, Scott, that Google are moving into OTA territory?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. And if you ask Google, they'd say no. Expedia and Booking combined are two probably of their largest 5 or 10 customers globally. I think they're spending $6 or $7 billion a year just on performance marketing. And for those of you out there who aren't currently participating on Google, that's a pretty good indicator. These are two absolute giants of the value that can be unlocked from efficiently participating in Meta. So Google has to be really careful with how they're perceived in terms of being an OTA, because they don't want to upset two of their best customers. However, it does seem more and more like they are moving into that space, especially with the book on Google kind of functionality that has been released in the last couple of months, that actually enables hotels to allow their conversion experience to take place off-site, and Google will actually do all of that process for hotels, albeit at quite a high expense, pretty in line with an OTA, maybe a little bit less.
And also from their perspective, they want to be the place where that traveler can find the best information. That is the first objective. And so if hoteliers outside of the OTAs are not providing that data, of course, the ad spend is very, very attractive, but also that partnership with OTAs and Google is very important because they have the amount of relevant data that they want to bring to the user of the search engine.
Return on investment for Metasearch compared to, say, taking part in PPC text ads?
Yes, it's a good question, and I think it depends quite a lot on lots of different factors. Even across the different Metasearch channels, we see different levels of return. I think there was a benchmark study that came out last year that showed, on average, the return on ad spend for Metasearch was around, I think, 7 to 11x as a rough benchmark. So somewhere between $7 and $11 for every dollar spent, versus Google AdWords, which was a little bit lower. I think it was more in the kind of 6 to 9 region. So it is slightly higher. And one of the predominant reasons for that is, as I kind of explained earlier, is Metasearch cards really only appear once you've typed in the name of that hotel. Whilst there is this map view here, we're still really early days in that. And actually, the vast majority of the impressions are coming through from that meta panel that appears on the right-hand side rather than through the map view. And so what that means is the user is already aware of your brand and they typed it in. And so what that means is that there's less wasted clicks or less prospecting in terms of if you're bidding for non-brand terms such as airport hotels in London or things like that. So that probably explains the kind of ROI because it's a more focused spend.
Great. We have a question in from Gopkumar who's asked, what factors does Google take into consideration? I think the question is regarding the order in which channels appear in an auction. Is it just pure cost per click, or do Google give weightage to commission percentage, last transacted volume, other parameters? Is there anything we know about this?
Sure. So the way Google operates is on a second price auction. So the winning bid will pay just a cent or a penny more than the second highest bid. And so just to kind of explain that, so if there are 5 people in the auction and the first bid is $5 and the second bid is $3, the winning bid will be $3.01. And then after that, it will just be ordered by rank. So that's really all. The only things that they're taking into consideration are, that bid amount, and then as well as what I mentioned earlier, which was that price accuracy score, because they will penalize you and make it more expensive if you to try and incentivize you to make sure that your prices are being accurate. But those are the 2 real key considerations. In terms of percentages, clearly if someone is offering to pay a higher CPA, if it's 14 versus 12%, then that will reflect in a higher bid. And so that provider will appear higher up.
Perfect, thank you, Scott. Patrick asks, what is your preferred bidding model on Google Hotel Ads, and have you integrated any Google audiences to boost performance for particular clients?
Sure. So when Triptease are bidding on Google Hotel Ads, we're not using their automated tools. We are always using our own AI and machine learning to make bespoke bidding decisions. In terms of from a client's perspective, we have, as I said earlier, we have 2 options that we give, which are, you can pay on a performance basis, so you pay per booking that we deliver, or you can actually you can give us a media budget which we will spend on your behalf, which can work out as being actually you get slightly greater ROI, but there's a little bit more risk with it because you have to give away that cash up front. In terms of audience lists, this is something that we think is super, super exciting. And this is a great example of where tying together both your on-site conversion data and experience with off-site and Metasearch, where they really come together. So we can, using audience lists, you can do really cool things, such as when you see certain behaviors that happen on your site, you can put that user into a bucket. So if we see, for example, there's a user who's made a search for their family to go and stay in the south of France over summer, and they've been on and they've made 3 searches over the last 5 days, you can be pretty sure that that person is looking to stay at your property. So you're able to, through Google, create an audience list of, maybe you call them like high value bookers or high intent bookers. And when you see certain behaviors, like user has made X many searches, you can put them into that bucket. And then if you see them again on Google, you can then pay more for them to make sure that you are appearing higher up than the OTAs. And again, this is that kind of like unfair advantage that you can get. And you know, that really has like a massive impact. And that links into the guest value index that we spoke about earlier.
Great. GoPro asks again, we've noticed that a lot of OTAs have the ability to showcase more information on meta results, presumably than the direct sites. This information can range from better CTA messages, additional room types. So I guess, why is this? And is this an option available to independents?
Yeah, so there's 2 additional pieces of information that you can show. One is the CTA message, or what Google call a call out. So these can be up to 25 characters in length, and Google have to approve them manually. But this is where, you know, every hotel that we have will have a call out live, because it's an opportunity. These typically only appear if you're in ad slot 1 or 2, normally just in 1. And it's just that extra bit of text underneath the listing. And maybe actually if we go back, just so it's really clear what we mean here. Sorry, I'm just letting so if you can see here underneath where it says hotel icon, it says book direct, best prices, exclusive deals. And so you're trying to put some things out there that will really like grab the attention of the consumer. And just by having like a few more characters, it instantly, you know, draws the eye towards that listing. So you think that's a really like no-brainer thing to have. That costs no extra money in terms of that click. It's free for you to have. So all listings should have that. In terms of the room types, so this is an experimental feature that Google have, which is called their room booking module. And you know, through there you are able to look at the different like configurations of rooms that are available. And like actually on most of these listings, if you they'll often say like view more rates, and within the Google UI you can look at, you know, the standard, deluxe, queen, king, or presidential suite. Often all of those prices will be listed, but it's only ever the cheapest price that is shown. In terms of what Google are doing with that, you know, sometimes it appears, sometimes it doesn't. It feels like one of the things that they're experimenting with, but certainly something that hotels can take advantage of. You just need to speak to your connectivity provider in order to enable it.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I think what you were saying there about using those call outs reminded me, Estella, of what you were talking a little bit about earlier with when we were talking about conversion, is if you have that information and you do have those benefits and you do have that differentiating factor from an OTA, making it as visible and as obvious as possible at every stage is super important.
Correct. And as Scott mentions, also, of course, start by checking that your connectivity provider has that Google feed, so that then you can exercise some of these options.
Absolutely. I think. Oh, Scott, did you want to jump in?
No, I think one of the things I was going to say. You know, if you're thinking about, okay, well, this sounds really interesting. How do I get connected up to Google? There are a number of different connectivity providers, but there's kind of 2 parts to the Metasearch piece. There's connectivity, and then there's management. So there's about 40 or so different companies which Google lists online on their website that enable to get you onto Google and onto all the other different Metasearch providers. And these can plumb into really your booking engine or your CRS or your channel manager, or your PMS. But that's just kind of like one piece of the puzzle. And then the second piece is the management. And then there's really 2 routes you can choose. It's, do I want to do self-manage, and do I want to make all these decisions myself? Do I want to give it to Google and let Google kind of do that? The only thing I would say with the Google automation is that you need to remember that they have slightly different incentives to you. They're trying to maximize the revenue they get rather than maximizing the amount of bookings that you get. Or you can go to an agency who will manage that bidding for you, and really who that's their expertise. And typically we see that there's a real uplift that you can get from doing that.
Great, thanks. So I think we're coming to the end of our time today, and I hope the content has been useful. I also wanted to say a really big thank you to Estella and SHR for helping us run this webinar today. and also to you, Scott, for giving up your time to talk us through some of this. So we will be making the recording available. I do apologise if your question didn't get answered today, but we will try and follow up with as many of those as possible. And if you do have further questions for either Scott or Estella, do just email us, content@triptease.com, and we'll make sure they get put to the right person. So that was all from me. Scott and Estella, I didn't know if you wanted to sign off yourselves.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for staying with us through the webinar. And please feel free to reach out from an SHR perspective. We have that direct connectivity with Google. We definitely work with the Triptease and are seeing some great results for our partners. So we're happy to help with your distribution strategy.
Yeah, and thank you all for listening. It's really great to be able to talk about this. My friends and family get very bored of it. So yeah, hope to hear more from lots of you in the future.
Thanks so much, everybody. So look out for that email tomorrow where we'll be sending around the recording. Thanks. Bye.